So before we start, I think it's nice that we get an idea of who is participating. Quite some farmers, super nice. Now curious if you have already experience with cover crops. Okay, so we are here talking with a group with quite some experience.
I am Katrien Geudens from Hooibeekhoeve Research Center on Dairy Farming in Belgium, and Pol is from LTA in Luxembourg. Maybe first of all, we have to stress that the presentation is set up on cover crops after a maize crop. And yeah, you will notice this during the presentation. Some results of trials, for example, are only on this maize. Maybe a short overview, of what we are going to present. First of all, the functions of the cover crops, how to choose the cover crop, how to sow, the techniques and the timing of it, different mixtures and varieties, and the destruction of the cover crop. So we are going to do an overview of the entire process of the cover crop. Okay. Yep, next slide, please. Thank you. There are different functions of a cover crop. Often we hear from farmers when they establish a cover crop that they do it because of the legislation in the countries. They are different because we are from 5 different countries. We are not going into the legislation part, but next to the legislation, cover crops have a lot of other functions. First of all, they can pick up nitrogen, so this nitrogen can't leach, and after the growing of the cover crop in spring, they can release the nitrogen again for the following crop. They can also improve the soil structure. That's mainly due to the root characteristics of the cover crop. You can see an increase in soil organic matter. They can give protection against erosion and soil compaction, and they can also reduce soil-borne pathogens. Because there is an other crop on the field, you have an inhibition of weeds, due to this crop. They can also be used for fodder production, but it isn't necessary. And if you use them for fodder production, then the effect, for example, on the soil organic matter will be less. For all these reasons, all these functions, we can call this a real FAB measure.
Sorry.
I think one back. Yeah, thank you. When we have a deeper look on the cover crops, in this table you see all kinds of different crops and also some mixtures. And a couple of years ago, we had a student to do some field work on this, and he discovered that there is a big difference in biomass from the leaves and the roots. And so what you see on the field is just the top of the iceberg of what is really there on organic matter. Okay, next slide, please. Second of all, the effect on nitrogen. In this table, you see it's focused on 2 years, 2016, 2017. And there are several different cover crops and mixtures that were established, and we looked at the nitrate residue after this cover crop or during this cover crop, and we saw that you can't say that one is better than the other, or that there is this one best solution for all soils and all types of of fields to have this big effect on the nitrate residue. We see that the effect is more linked to the year than to the crop or the mixture. Okay, next slide, please.
Okay, that's my part. So warm welcome also from my side. Like Katrien already said, when we are talking about cover crops, they are providing biomass to the soil, to the field. So when we are planning now the fertilization of the upcoming cash crop, it's important to consider, for example, the nitrogen that a cover crop could provide to the cash crop. So we have here a method from our French colleagues to help the farmers to estimate this amount of nitrogen. So in the first step, you have to estimate the biomass that the crop that's on the field. So we have here two examples. We have well-established cover crops and more not so. And in the second step, you have this table when you have him mustard, and we are talking about a dry matter of 1 to 2 tons of biomass. Then this cover crop will provide 3.2 kilo of nitrogen. Yes, that's also important. When we are talking about the cover crop, we also it's important to talk about the roots. So we have different types of roots. Sorry, I think we have a different, yes. We have different types of roots, like we are seeing here. We have more thick roots, we have thin roots. They are working on different deeps of soil. And so we have different association with these roots that are working with bacteria and so further on. And when we have a cover crop on the field, so these are improving the soil structure and increasing the water infiltration. This has to do with the greater soil porosity due to the macropores that are formed as roots, and they decomposed. So we see here different types also of roots. You're going deeper and not so deep.
Okay. This is a graph from the Soil Investigation Service of Belgium. It's a model which shows the relation between the content of carbon in the soil, and then on the vertical axis you see the yield, estimated yield of maize on that field. We tried to see whether the graph is correct, and the orange button is a trial field of Hooibeekhoeve, which shows that there is indeed this relation between those two. The content of carbon of the soil is very important due to several things. They have an effect on as well biological, chemical, and physical aspects of the soil, this relation to yield is a very close relation. The higher the carbon content, the higher the yield.
Another important function of the cover crop, especially during the winter, is the protection against erosion and soil sealing. As we are seeing here now on the left side on the pictures, when we have already 25% of plant material on the soil, we have already a 50% reduction of erosion. But when we are talking about cover crops, later on we're going to speak a little bit more about it. It's also important how we are going to destroy these cover crops. And we are seeing we have on the table different methods on destruction. And this destruction will reduce the protection against erosion immediate, very quick. And another function that's known of cover crops, but is that they can reduce diseases and pests. Here's, for example, an oilseed radish. This oilseed radish is working like a trap for nematodes. So with this oilseed radish, you can reduce the nematodes in the soil.
But then which crop to choose? There is a huge range of cover crops on the market, and then you can even not only use single crops or cover crops, but also mixtures. What do you have to take into account when you choose a cover crop? Well, the first of all is when do you harvest your main crop? Because that's why I stressed out at the beginning that we focus on maize here. Because this is rather late harvest and the possibilities or the choices of the cover crop that can follow are rather limited. Second thing to take into consideration is, do you want a perennial cover crop? Do you want it to survive the winter or not? Then the function of the cover crop. Do you want it to be good for nitrate uptake, so you limit the leaching of nitrate, or are you more going or willing to focus on the carbon content of the cover crop? One more thing is, what's the effect on the next crop that's grown on the field? This cover crop is part of a rotation. You have a crop before, you have a crop afterwards. Is there an effect on the next crop? And is it positive? We hope so. And then the last question you have to ask yourself is, do you want to use the cover crop to feed the animals or not? Okay, next slide, please. When you choose a cover crop, there are three main categories to see these crops in. The first is the leafy kinds of cover crops. And for these crops, they grow fast on the surface, but they have less roots that they form. Therefore, they are limited in the carbon input because, like you saw in this very first graph, the main part of the cover crop is under the ground, and that's mainly the case for the grassy species. The leafy species, they have the relation is different. They have much more leaves compared to the roots, but they have a rather deep rooting, and therefore they have a high uptake of nitrogen and also a fast release after the destruction of the cover crop. The second group are the grassy cover crops. They have a very strong root development and therefore a high organic matter input in the soil. And they can pick up a high amount of nitrogen, but the uptake is rather slow. And also the release afterwards is rather slow. And then the third group are the legumes. They can do nitrogen fixation and they have deep roots, so they can also pick up nitrogen from deeper soil layers, but the organic matter input is again rather limited. Yeah, next slide, please.
Just one thing about the question, sorry to interrupt. There was the thing about perennial crops. I guess you meant overwintering or hard plants.
Yeah.
Okay.
For the choice of the cover crop, like I just said, you have to see it in the entire rotation. What was the previous crop and what's the following crop? And are there maybe problems at the fields? Paul, you can push enter a few times. 3, I think. You can have problems like harmful nematodes, fungi, or insects. And mainly for the insects, you have to take into consideration that they have several stages in their life, and that one stage can be more harmful than the other, but also that the habitat of the different stages isn't always the same. Okay, next slide, please. For example, for the wireworms, they can cause a lot of trouble in maize and potatoes, for example, but they also like to use grassy crops as a habitat. So if you place a grassy cover crop before the maize or before the potatoes, it can cause problems in that main crop. So certainly on fields where there is already a pressure of wireworms, where there is already a problem, you have to take this into consideration. Okay, next slide, please. In a previous project we did, the Levende Bodem was also Interreg project, but only for Flanders and the Netherlands. And a few of you were also in this project, and there we made up a decision tool to choose a cover crop. It's in Dutch, but there are also versions not of this decision tool, but similar ones in French, definitely, and probably also in English. And there you can on top choose a lot of aspects on this cover crop. The things I said before, is it for nitrogen uptake, carbon content, and etc., and also on the diseases. And then you get a range of cover crops that you can pick out one or more for a mixture cover crops. Okay, next slide, please. Talking about these mixtures, yeah, if you choose for a mixture, you have more chance on success. And because of the different routing of if you choose crops from these 3 different main groups, then you can also have the positive effects of these 3 groups. For example, a combination of organic matter input and nitrogen uptake. Okay. But you have to pay attention if you have a mixture and the seeds are not all of the same size, then you can have a demixing during the sowing process. So you really have to pay attention to that. You can make a perfect mixture on your farm, but due to the traffic to your fields, because of the bubbling, it can demix again, and then you don't have a mixture on your field, but just, for example, grass on the one part and clover on the other part. And these mixtures, you also can't say before the growing season what they will look like, because it really depends of the growing season and the circumstances at the field, but also the temperature, rainfall, etc. Which crop of the mixture will be the main crop you see on the fields. For example, in these two pictures, you see the same mixture, one in 2016, the other in 2017. And yeah, you can see very well that in 2016, the Italian ryegrass did very well. And in 2017, you see a lot more clover. Okay. Then the sowing time. At Hooibeekhoeve, we now have for about 6 years, I think, experience with different sowing times of this cover crop in maize. We sow them together with the main crop with the maize. We use the technique of undersow, where we sow the cover crop at different stages of the maize. Can be at the 1-2 leaf stage, 4-5 leaf stage, or 8-10 leaf stage. Or we can establish them after harvest. And during this masterclass, we are into the deep for this last sort at the cover crop after harvest. The other ones would take us too far. This doesn't mean that we don't like to talk about it, but in this masterclass we pay attention on the last group, and maybe we will have the chance for another masterclass on this undersow techniques, because we know that certainly in the Netherlands, this is a technique that's, yeah, because of legislation, picked up by a lot of farmers. But when you can only sow after the harvest of the maize, it's already late in the growing season, and we would like to stress this figure. This graph, it's quite convenient, I think. The earlier you sow the cover crop, the more biomass you can create. But in this graph, it's very clear that in later stages, for example, after the 15th of October, actually you see a not well developed cover crop. And the less it is developed, the less profit you have of it. The better it is developed, the more functions you will see on the cover crop. Can be both on organic matter input or nitrogen uptake, etc. Okay. But yeah, if you can only sow this late in the season, what to choose? You see here all kinds of in the left column, all kinds of cover crops, and then the blue lines is the best time to sow these crops. And yeah, if you can harvest only in September, like with maize, then the choice in crops is rather limited, and you mainly have to focus on this grassy species. Okay.
So when we are talking about sowing techniques, we have our colleagues from the LACU in Luxembourg who have done or are doing still some trials, and they are using different kinds of machines. I'm just showing here in the presentation. That's under sowing no-till. An important question of what technique we are using is what cover crop we are sowing. So we want to have a rapid establishment and growing of this cover crop. But what is also important by the sowing technique is the labor for the farmer. So he want to have reduced labor and reduced costs. So they have also make some calculation with these different techniques, and so the conclusion is a little bit that the precision cultivator is the best choice when we are looking about the development of the cover crop and the coasts. So that's would be a nice point in the discussion later on. So that's just for later on. We have also some problems with the weather conditions with the establishment of the cover crop. Another point is the fertilization of the cover crops. First of all, we have to consider the legislation, what is allowed and what isn't allowed. It's when we are looking on the farmer, it could be interesting to help the farmer the manure and slurry management. When we are talking about storage capacity and how are the weather conditions to spread the slurry or the manure. Our advisors here in Luxembourg, when we are talking about manure management by maize crop, our advisors in Luxembourg, they are saying it's better to spread the manure in summer and then establish a cover crop. So the mineralization is already beginning, and when we have a cover crop, they are catching the nitrogen and they are releasing it in the spring. So it's more efficiency. But what's really important during the last years is to consider the residual nitrogen of the cash crop that was on the field. So we have these dry weather conditions, and so there mostly is a lot of nitrogen left on the field. Another point is the destruction of the cover crop. So we have mostly in Luxembourg we have cover crops that will be winter kill, and so they are leaving only a residue to manage that we have to manage in spring. But when we are talking about the water quality, then overwintering cover crops are more interesting. So a method is to spray the cover crop with an herbicide before planting the spring crop. But now with the ban of the glyphosate, so it isn't so easy, and it shouldn't be the method of choice. So our colleagues now from Delacroix have some trials here with a new machine to destroy the cover crop. We are seeing here grazing land, and they are also trying to use some microorganisms to improve the destruction of the organic matter. So that's also an interesting issue for the discussion later on. So we are seeing here just the destruction of this grassland. Okay.
Yeah, and as the end of our presentation, some things to keep in mind when talking about cover crops. When you do the destruction of a cover crop, keep in mind that you have to reduce the size of the crop as much as possible, because otherwise you will have a silage effect in the soil. And also keep in mind that for the volunteers of seeds, that's when they the cover crop gets into seed and it sows itself on the field, it might become a weed in the following crop. We also saw something like that this year with some grassy cover crops, and afterwards we saw fodder beets on it, but the grass it was very hard to destroy afterwards. And then last but not least, the cover crops could be hosts for pests, like we already said before. So keep in mind that you don't give habitat to pests that are a problem at your field. Okay. I would like to thank you for your attention.